Welcome to the Week 9 video lecture on capital punishment. Before we get started, I want to review what we've gone over in the class so far. We started off the course by thinking about what moral theories are. Then we took a look at a challenge to the idea that there are universal moral theories. We did this when we looked at the challenge of cultural relativism. We've also looked at two different moral theories. We've looked at the theory of Kantian ethics or deontology, and we've also looked at the theory of utilitarianism. We're going to shift gears a little bit as we move past the first half of the semester. Now we're going to study moral issues. These are typically questions of policy or culture, and the discussion of whether they are right or wrong. Traditionally, ethical issues include things like abortion, the rightness or wrongness of war, recreational drug use, birth control, and so on and so forth. The two that we're going to look at are capital punishment and the treatment of non-human animals. So you may be wondering how to approach moral issues or ethical issues. And I'm sure most or all of you already have some views about capital punishment or how to treat animals. But as a side note, I should ask you where these views come from. So do your views about capital punishment or animals, do they come from a moral theory? Or do they come from someplace else? Do they come from family, friends, teachers, etc.? If they come from someplace else, it's worth putting them aside for a second and thinking about what moral theories have to say about these issues. Now, when considering moral issues, there are two things that are really important. It's the moral theory itself and the moral principles that follow from them, and then our own intuitions. So when you're doing or when you're thinking about moral issues, you're going to weigh these things against each other. You're going to compare what each of them says. If we consider the case of Tracy Latimer from week 1, we can apply the principle from utilitarianism to that case, which says that we ought not to punish Robert Latimer for killing his daughter because when he killed her, he ended her suffering. That was the right thing to do according to utilitarianism. We should weigh this, however, when we're considering this as a moral issue, against our own intuition. And my intuition to that case is, oh my gosh, this person has killed an innocent, helpless human being. Notice how those conflict or those contrast. On the one hand, the principle says we ought to not punish this person for killing somebody. And on the other hand, my intuition says, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Just reporting those is a good way to get started when we're thinking about moral issues. To go further, we can amend or change either our moral theory or our intuition. And that would be another step forward in thinking about moral issues. As you do the required readings, you're going to come across a lot of statistical figures, names of court cases, and a lot of interesting debates about punishment in general, and even about the death penalty in general. While this is all interesting, it can be kind of a rabbit hole. It's very easy to jump off the path and to study one of these side issues and to study it very seriously. For our purposes in this course, I want to stay a little bit more focused. We're just going to focus on one issue in particular, and that is the rightness or the wrongness of the death penalty. In other words, is it right or is it wrong to punish a criminal by executing them? So retributivism is the thesis that criminals should be punished according to their crime. There are a few kinds of retributivism, and there have been a lot of retributivists in recent history. Some say that the seriousness of a crime and a punishment should match. So if you commit a very serious crime, you should also have a very serious punishment. So Kant was a very strict kind of retributivist. He thought that crime was the measure for the punishment, or in other words, that we should do exactly to criminals what they did to their victims. In other words, if a criminal stole $20, then the criminal would be forced to pay $20. If the criminal committed murder, then the criminal was put to death or was given the death penalty, in other words. So Kant is a very strict kind of retributivist. In recent years, they have become more lenient, but we are interested in Kant's version of this idea. Now, Kant also thinks that punishing criminals is a way to treat them as humans. It's a way to treat them as part of humanity. And that's because this goes back to Kant's theory about the will and his theory about imperatives. So if you remember, we talked about two different kinds of imperatives, and we talked about how Kant thinks that whenever we act, we're acting on an imperative. When I decide to make these video lectures, I have an imperative to create these video lectures, and I'm acting on my will to create that imperative. So basically, we come up for rules for ourselves, and then we act according to those rules, is the simple version of that. So for Kant, when we act, we will imperatives. And so when a thief steals, that thief is willing an imperative. She is acting on a rule to steal. That stealing is okay, that she should steal. And so when we punish that criminal, we're treating them as a part of humanity, as somebody who is willing their own rules. And we're following their rules when we decide to steal from them. So let's imagine this case. So a criminal wills the rule that she should be able to steal $20, and so she steals $20. When we come back to punish her, according to Kant, we should steal $20 from her because she's already willed that rule. She thinks that's an okay rule to follow. So when we follow that rule and steal $20 from her, what we're actually doing is we're treating her as a human being who willed her own rules and is now suffering the consequences of them. There is a lot to think about in these readings, and I can't wait to read your discussion post for the week. Have a great weekend.